A study from Columbia University found the Black community suffers from an increased rate of mental health concerns, including anxiety and depression. So, Senator Peters, I know you are very passionate about this subject. Can you please explain the mental health needs in Black community that are often exacerbated and mostly unfulfilled?
Yeah, I mean, just full disclosure, I'm going to go see my therapist later today. And I've been seeing my therapist now for, I think, a decade. I remember when I first met them, which was at a Halloween party, and I had a lot of trust issues. That's why I see a therapist, everybody. And I actually held onto their card for a whole month. Did not call because they gave me their card because we met at a party. I actually preferred that that's how I met my therapist. I remember when I first went to therapy, I did not talk to my therapist for about 2 to 3 months really about anything because I was too nervous or anxious to really open up about the things in my life. And then my mom passed away and I was like, well, I guess I should talk about this. And ever since then, it's been truly a transformative experience for me. And I've even had another sort of breakthrough recently when it came to my therapy and shows the value of therapy, at least for me. What I would say is we have seen, particularly in the pandemic, and I think there was some, I can't remember if there was oh my God, there's a journalist who did research on the rise in suicide deaths, particularly when it comes to Black men in Chicago. This has been a thing that was reported in the morgue. I think this goes back to that John Henry thing. There's a serious crisis when it comes to mental health. First, it's the access when it comes to mental health. Let's be blunt. It's not always going to be there. Either it's not open in the community, it's hard to find somebody. Then there's the fact that we don't have enough Black men who are therapists. So when we have a hiring concern and hiring issues there, particularly coming through social work. And then the other one is that if you're always stuck in the mindset that you have to quote unquote grind it out, it's hard to even make time to open up about that. And the other one is that if you have to be supposedly the strongest person, going to see a therapist has not necessarily been considered being the strongest person. And so I think we need to break through that barrier. For me, I thought it was a point of pride in my 20s, particularly in my late 20s, to be like, I don't see a therapist. Why do I need to see a therapist, right? Like, what am I going to get out of a therapist? And then, of course, it took me a moment of real serious crisis to finally go see a therapist. And then even then, to engage in the awkward conversation of opening up, now to the point where I see a therapist 10 years on, where I'm literally talking about, I mean, sometimes I'll feel like I go to a therapy session and I'm just rambling more so than I do with you guys on a regular basis. And I'm just rambling. But what comes out of that is then my therapist might have one little insight that just like opens something up for me. And I have that like, oh, wow, I didn't think about it that way. And I carry that with me. And maybe I talk to about somebody. So I think it's about making sure that sometimes opening up is what we need to reduce those pressures. That's A. B, we need people who look like us in this profession. I think that's vitally important. That is a very serious issue. The pandemic has been particularly painful. It's led to a rise of death by suicide. That's been very painful. And that has a knock-on effect of trauma, right? If you're, a Black father, your kid, there's a death by suicide, that kid carries that with them. And so we need to be able to say to folks, yeah, actually, you should talk about that experience. And so I think that's sort of the pathway through it, what's happening, and sort of a pathway to get out of it.
That same study, that Columbia University study, excuse me, related to economic insecurities and associated experiences, such as violence and criminal injustice, further compounding the mental health disparities in the Black population. Senator Sims, as someone who has worked heavily on the criminal justice reform, what do you think needs to be done to tackle this head on?
I appreciate that question. And even your lead into this discussion, talking about our vulnerabilities. As you mentioned, Senator Belt, there's this feeling in the Black community, particularly, that that Black people don't go to therapy. We go to church. And you have having to fight that battle. This is not a new concept. Thousands of years ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle said that poverty is the parent of crime and revolution, and we continue to see that coming on and continuing even to this day. We have a crisis of economic insecurity in our community and a lack and loss of hope. When you see that lack and loss of hope, then that's going to manifest itself in some very negative ways. When you have, and we've talked about Black men in particular being, having a higher incidence of being working class or being seen as working class, or also having a higher proportion of being involved with the criminal justice system. I really appreciate this discussion because it talks about, and it allows for us to talk about the vulnerabilities and the systemic trauma and the pressures that Black men and we as Black men feel, because there is this negative narrative that's created against Black men that is perpetuated every day. If you look at the 5 o'clock, the 6 o'clock, the 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock newscast, when crime happens, you are going to see this negative image and imagery that continues to perpetuate itself over and over again of this violent Black male. But you don't see on the 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, or 10 o'clock news the positive stories that are going on in the community. You don't see the work that's being done by Senator Harris to do his coaching and his mentoring in his community. You don't see the work being done by Senator Belt and the work that you are doing on your college tour. You don't see the work that Senator Peters is doing in being on the front lines on dealing with economic insecurity. You don't see the work that I'm doing in terms of mentoring. Those are not stories that are often portrayed. And we are not, and as even though we are leaders, we are part of the 59 people who get the honor of serving in the Illinois Senate at any one time. We are not the exceptions. We are the rule. There are many more African American men doing positive things in our community that just don't get the limelight. They don't get the exposure. That positive narrative is not fed into, but the negative one is fueled. And that's why you see these policies be pushed in our criminal legal system, not our criminal justice system, because if you have a criminal justice system, there's justice for everyone. But when you see a criminal legal system, you see policies that are pushed to keep individuals down. And that's why the work that we have done in criminal justice and in reforming our criminal legal system is to push us towards a criminal justice system. And that's why, we have always talked about creating these pathways to opportunities, create these pathways to success. And that's the work that we've done, getting away from these negative narratives, pushing us towards showing the light on the great things that are happening in all of our communities by Black men and Black people across our communities to invest in upliftment. And that we need to change. So for me, I think we've got to focus on how we change the narrative and how we tell our story. And conversations like this help us to do that.
Senator Harris, then with all that's been said about our mental health, and you touched upon it earlier in a previous segment, then what can we do to take better care of our mental health? What does it look like? I mean, we know how important it is. We know that it has a direct implications on our physical health. So what do we need to do?
Well, we have to be vulnerable. Like I said before, vulnerability is key. And when you're not vulnerable, you hold everything in. And when you hold everything in, it produces stresses on your body. We have to be able to talk about things that are traumatic in our lives, things that maybe sometimes for us as Black men be embarrassing because we are so strong, or we are taught to be so strong that if we have anything that seems to be wrong with us, it's embarrassing. Oh man, they don't think I'm strong. They think I'm soft. So I'm embarrassed by that. Or I don't make as much money or can't provide the way I want to provide for my family. That's embarrassing to them. We have to be vulnerable in such a way that if it's not a professional, as Senator Peters was mentioning earlier. We have to be able to confide in someone, a friend. We have to be able to confide in someone to be able to release those stresses off our mind till we can, gather our thoughts and be more productive citizens. And I think that's very important, to be able to just have an outlet. A lot of times we don't have outlets because, like I said, we've been trained in our community, and you mentioned it earlier in your opening comments, that, hey, boys don't cry. You fall off your bike, get up, brush yourself off. Don't worry about it. You're okay. As Big Mom used to say, put some tussin on it. So there are things that we pass down from generation to generation about toughness, but it's like putting a Band-Aid over a gunshot wound. We're not addressing the problem. We're just simply passing over, being passive over some of the potential solutions to the problem. So we have to sit down and talk about it. We have to be vulnerable. We have to take systemic approaches to say, hey, these are the steps that I'm going to take to make sure that my mental health is intact. And therefore, once my mental is intact, the physical will follow. Because now I've set forth a plan, as Senator Sims said earlier. You have to have a plan, and you have to not only have a plan, you have to have a firm belief in how you're going to execute your plan. You got to say, hey, these are the steps that I need to take, and these are the processes that I'm going to use to execute my plan. So I think when you put those two together, that's the way you come out of this situation, with us being more vulnerable, with us being more open to have those discussions amongst men and amongst going to seek professional help, and not seeing it as a stigma, but seeing it as an opportunity to get better.